My name is Alex, and I'm 24, fresh out of college, working as a tech support guy at my old high school, Old Pine High. It's a job I landed thanks to Mr. Reynolds, my old computer science teacher, who remembered me fondly from my student days. The school hadn't changed much, still a maze of dimly lit hallways, creaky staircases, and ancient lockers. My office, if you could call it that, was in the basement, a cluttered, windowless space filled with dusty servers and outdated tech equipment. I shared the space with two other guys, Ben and Carl. We had made it our own little sanctuary, complete with an old couch, a mini fridge, and a TV that barely worked. Most days were uneventful, just fixing computer issues and making sure the school's network didn't implode. But one day everything changed, and I found myself in a situation straight out of a horror movie. It was a gloomy Friday afternoon in November, the kind where the sky looks like it's about to burst into tears. The school was buzzing with the usual pre-weekend excitement, kids eager to escape for a couple of days. I was in the basement, alone, as Ben and Carl had gone upstairs to deal with some network issues in the admin office. I didn't mind the solitude. It was a chance to catch up on some reading and maybe sneak in a nap. I was halfway through my sandwich when the PA system crackled to life. Mrs. Jenkins, the school secretary, sounded unusually tense as she announced, "Attention, staff and students, this is a lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately." I felt a chill run down my spine. Lockdowns were rare, and they never felt like drills, even when they were. I quickly turned off the lights and the flickering computer monitors, plunging the room into darkness. The basement door didn't have a proper lock, just a latch that anyone with enough determination could force open. I crouched behind my desk, phone in hand, and texted Ben and Carl to see if they knew what was going on. Neither of them replied. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. My phone vibrated, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a text from Ben. "Some crazy guy with a knife is in the building. Stay hidden." My heart pounded in my chest. A knife? This was no ordinary lockdown. I heard the basement door creak open, the sound echoing ominously through the dark, empty space. Footsteps followed, slow and deliberate. Someone was coming down the stairs. My mind raced. Could it be Ben or Carl? Or was it the intruder? I held my breath, trying to make myself as small and silent as possible. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. I could hear my own heartbeat, a deafening drum in the silence. The person started moving again, closer and closer to my hiding spot. I peered out from behind my desk, straining to see in the dim light. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall and menacing, holding something shiny in one hand. I ducked back down, my mind racing. Should I make a run for it? Try to hide somewhere else? The footsteps grew louder, and I knew I didn't have much time. I decided to stay put, praying that whoever it was wouldn't find me. Suddenly, the figure entered the room, and I could see him clearly. He was wearing a black hoodie, the hood pulled up over his head, obscuring his face. In his right hand, he held a large knife, its blade glinting in the faint light. He moved with a terrifying calmness, as if he had all the time in the world. My phone vibrated again, and I cursed silently. I checked the message, another one from Ben. "Cops are on their way, hang in there." I turned off my phone, not wanting to risk another noise giving away my position. The intruder was now in the center of the room, looking around. He seemed to be searching for something, or someone. My heart raced as he approached the desks, his knife glinting ominously. I could barely breathe. Every muscle in my body tensed, ready to bolt if necessary. Just as he reached my desk, there was a loud noise from upstairs, a door slamming, followed by hurried footsteps. The intruder froze, his head snapping toward the sound. He hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked briskly back toward the stairs. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. As soon as he was out of sight, I scrambled out from under the desk and made a beeline for the small storage room at the back of the basement. It was cramped and filled with old equipment, but it had a lockable door. I slipped inside, closed the door quietly, and turned the lock, my hands shaking. I could hear the intruder moving around upstairs, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be happening. Were Ben and Carl okay? Were the students safe? I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. Whoever this guy was, he had no right to terrorize our school. Minutes felt like hours as I huddled in the storage room, straining to hear any sounds that might indicate what was happening. Suddenly, there was a commotion upstairs, a series of loud bangs, followed by shouting. My heart leapt. The police must have arrived. I stayed hidden, not daring to move until I was sure it was safe. The shouting continued for what felt like an eternity, then gradually died down. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs again, but these were different. Heavier, more purposeful. Police officers, I hoped. I unlocked the door cautiously, peering out. Sure enough, 2 officers were making their way through the basement, checking every corner. I stepped out, hands raised to show I was unarmed. Thank God, one of the officers said, spotting me. Are you okay? I nodded, my voice shaky as I replied, I'm fine. There's no one else down here. They escorted me upstairs where the scene was chaotic. Students and teachers were huddled in groups, some crying, others talking in hushed tones. Ben and Carl were among them, looking shaken but unharmed. I rushed over, and we exchanged relieved hugs. The intruder had been apprehended, the officers explained. He was a former student, someone who had a grudge against the school and had come back to settle it. He'd been carrying a knife and several other weapons, but fortunately, no one had been seriously injured. As the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion hit me like a freight train. We spent the rest of the day giving statements to the police and trying to process what had happened. The school was closed for a few days, and when it reopened, things were different. Security was tighter, and everyone was a little more cautious, a little more aware of the potential dangers lurking in the shadows. I continued working at Old Pine High, but the basement office never felt the same. Every creak, every unexpected noise set my nerves on edge. I'd lie if I said the experience didn't change me. It made me more vigilant, more aware of my surroundings, and it made me appreciate the fragility of safety, something I had taken for granted for far too long. The lockdown incident became a dark chapter in the school's history, a story whispered in hallways and classrooms. For me, it was a stark reminder of the unpredictability of life and the importance of staying alert, even in the most familiar of places. It was the second week of my senior year when everything changed. The initial excitement of the new school year had faded, and the usual routine had set in. Classes, homework, and the occasional drama were the norm. But that day, a Thursday, started off like any other day. I remember walking into the building, the hallways bustling with students chatting, laughing, and rushing to their lockers. The morning announcements echoed through the PA system, reminding us of upcoming events and club meetings. My first class was math, a subject I usually dreaded, but Mr. Thompson made it bearable with his dry humor and engaging teaching style. Halfway through the lesson, just as I was beginning to grasp the concept of quadratic equations, the school's lockdown alarm blared. At first, I thought it was a drill. We had those periodically, and they were usually nothing more than a brief interruption, but something about this one felt different. Mr. Thompson's face turned pale, and he motioned for us to move quickly and quietly to the designated corner of the room, out of sight from the door. We all huddled together, the usual chatter and giggles replaced by a tense silence. The lights were turned off, and Mr. Thompson locked the door, peeking through the small window before covering it with a piece of construction paper. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to steady my breathing. I glanced at my friends, their faces mirroring my fear and confusion. Minutes felt like hours. The silence was broken only by the occasional whispered reassurance from Mr. Thompson and the distant sounds of footsteps echoing in the hallways. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a drill that had gone wrong, or was there something more sinister happening? Suddenly, we heard a loud bang from down the hall, followed by the sound of running. My stomach dropped, and I could feel the collective tension in the room increase. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened, and he motioned for us to stay silent. The footsteps grew louder, closer. It sounded like someone, or something, was running frantically through the halls, searching. I pressed myself against the wall, my knees pulled to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. My breath caught in my throat, and I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping, praying that whoever was out there would move on. But they didn't. There was a soft, almost tentative knock on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My blood ran cold. Mr. Thompson stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the door. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I could hear my classmates breathing, shallow and rapid, mirroring my own fear. Then a voice. It was low and calm, almost soothing. "Let me in," it said. "I know you're in there." It was a man's voice, unfamiliar and chilling. Mr. Thompson shook his head slowly, signaling for us to remain silent. The voice continued, growing more impatient. "Open the door. I just want to talk." I could feel my pulse in my ears, each beat louder than the last. The doorknob rattled, and the door shook as if someone was trying to force it open. Mr. Thompson stood his ground, his body blocking any view through the small window. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the rattling stopped. There was a long, agonizing moment of silence. Then the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and the room seemed to exhale with me. We stayed in our corner for what felt like an eternity, too afraid to move or speak. Finally, the lockdown alarm ended, replaced by the principal's shaky voice over the PA system. "The lockdown is over. Please remain in your classrooms until further notice." Mr. Thompson slowly unlocked the door and peeked outside before motioning for us to return to our seats. The atmosphere in the room was tense, the air heavy with unspoken fears. I glanced at the clock, realizing that only 20 minutes had passed since the alarm first sounded. It felt like a lifetime. The rest of the day was a blur. Police officers arrived, and we were eventually escorted to the gym for a debriefing. They told us that an intruder had entered the building, but they didn't give many details. The man had been apprehended, but the image of his voice, calm and menacing, stayed with me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those knocks and that voice. I replayed the events in my mind, wondering who the man was and what he had wanted. The next day at school, rumors flew, each one more terrifying than the last. Some said he was a disgruntled former employee. Others believed he was just a random intruder. No one knew for sure. The lockdown incident became a deafening moment for my senior year. The sense of security I once felt at school was shattered, replaced by a constant undercurrent of fear. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, jumping at sudden noises, and feeling uneasy in large crowds. Despite the fear, life went on. We returned to our routines, but the memory of that day lingered. It was a reminder of how quickly everything could change, how vulnerable we really were. And even though the man was caught, his presence still haunted me, a shadow that I couldn't shake. Graduation came and went, and I moved on to college, trying to leave the past behind. But every now and then, when I hear a knock at the door or a calm, unfamiliar voice, I'm transported back to that classroom, huddled in the dark with my classmates, hoping and praying for safety. It's a memory that time hasn't faded, a reminder of a day that started like any other and ended in a nightmare. The morning at Westbrook High School had started just like any other. The sun was shining brightly, casting long shadows across the schoolyard as students filtered in, backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughter and chatter filling the air. I arrived just in time for the first period, a bit groggy from a late night of cramming for a biology test. The bell rang sharply, and the hallways began to empty as everyone settled into their respective classrooms. I was in English class, sitting in my usual seat by the window. Mrs. Thompson was in the middle of a passionate lecture about Shakespeare's Macbeth, her voice rising and falling dramatically as she recited lines from the play. I tried to focus, but my mind kept wandering to the upcoming test and the weekend plans with friends. That's when the intercom crackled to life, interrupting the flow of the lesson. "Attention, all students and staff. This is a lockdown. I repeat, this is a lockdown. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately." The principal's voice was calm but urgent, each word laced with a gravity that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't a drill. Mrs. Thompson's face blanched, but she quickly took control. All right, everyone, move to the corner of the room, away from the windows. Stay quiet and stay low. We scrambled to the designated corner, huddling together like a frightened herd. I could feel the tension in the room, palpable and thick. Whispers of confusion and fear floated through the air. What's happening? Is this for real? Who would do this? My heart pounded in my chest, the sound almost deafening in the heavy silence that followed. I strained to hear any sounds from the hallway, every nerve on edge. And then we heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls, slow and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat as the footsteps grew louder, closer. I dared to peek through the small window in the door, my curiosity battling my fear. A figure emerged from the shadows and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. He was tall and imposing, clad in a long, tattered coat that looked like it had seen better days. His face was obscured by a grotesque mask, twisted into a perpetual sneer, the kind you'd expect to see in a horror movie. In his hands, he clutched an assortment of terrifying weapons, an axe, a large hunting knife, and something that looked like a homemade flamethrower. The sight was horrifying, like something out of a nightmare. He moved with a terrifying calmness, scanning the doors as he passed. My mind raced. Who was this man? Why was he here? Suddenly, there was a crash from down the hall, a door being kicked open, screams erupted, and I felt a surge of panic. He was inside one of the classrooms. Mrs. Thompson motioned for us to stay silent, her eyes wide with fear. We waited, every second feeling like an eternity. The screams grew louder, more desperate. I clenched my fists, feeling utterly helpless. Then, as abruptly as it began, the noise stopped. Silence filled the hallways once more, but it was a different kind of silence, one heavy with dread. I could hear him moving again, his footsteps now more hurried. He was searching for something or someone. My stomach churned at the thought. I glanced at my classmates, their faces mirrors of my own terror. We were all thinking the same thing. Would we be next? The intercom crackled again, and the principal's voice, though shaky, came through. Police are on their way. Stay hidden. Stay safe. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, every sound amplified in the stillness. The distant wail of sirens finally reached us, a sound that brought both relief and a new wave of fear. Would they get here in time? Suddenly, the door handle rattled. My blood ran cold. The killer was right outside our door. I held my breath, praying he would move on. The handle stopped moving, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, with a loud crash, the door was flung open. He stood there, his mask more terrifying up close. His eyes, visible through the slits, were cold and devoid of humanity. He stepped into the room, raising his axe. We screamed, the sound a chorus of pure terror. But just as quickly, he was tackled from behind. Mr. Reynolds, the gym teacher, had come out of nowhere, wrestling the killer to the ground. Chaos erupted as the police stormed in, pulling the attacker away in handcuffs. We were safe, but as I looked around at my classmates, their faces pale and shaken, I knew things would never be the same. The halls of Westbrook High would forever be haunted by the memory of the day the killer came. In the days that followed, the story of the masked killer spread like wildfire. The news channels were flooded with updates, interviews, and theories. It turned out he was a deranged former student, someone who had been expelled years ago and had harbored a deep grudge against the school ever since. His weapons were real, but thankfully no one had been seriously injured, thanks in large part to Mr. Reynolds' bravery. The school provided counselors for those who needed to talk, and extra security measures were put in place. But the fear lingered. Every creak in the hallway, every unexpected noise sent a jolt of anxiety through us. We had come face to face with a nightmare, and it had left its mark. As the weeks turned into months, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. But the events of that day were etched into our memories, a chilling reminder of the fragility of safety and the resilience we found in each other. Join us next time as we delve into more tales of terror and suspense, exploring the darkest corners of the human psyche and the supernatural forces that seek to exploit our deepest fears. Until then, remember to keep the lights on and never venture into the shadows alone.